there is a major movement in the Fani Willis disqualification case. Now, today at the ACLJ, we are filing. We are in process right now. I will get confirmation while we are on the air that we have filed a major brief in the appeals process asking the appeals court in Georgia, to overturn Scott McAfee's decision, the lower court judge, to keep Fani Willis on the case. And I'll read from our brief. I've got a copy of it right here in my hand. It says the ACLJ's specific concern is the integrity and preservation of the judicial system in a case with national implications. The ACLJ files this brief on behalf of its members who reside in Georgia, as the district attorney at issue in this case represents quite literally the entirety of the people of Georgia. The ACLJ also files this brief on behalf of its members who do not reside in Georgia, but who are concerned that their ability to meaningfully vote for a president may be hampered by a politically motivated and infected prosecution still very much bearing, quote, an odor of mendacity. To preserve justice and confidence in the judicial process, amicus curiae urge this court to reverse the lower court and disqualify the district attorney. This case, as far as the lower proceedings, have been put on hold as the appeals court hears this appeal. They've set an argument date for October. I believe it's October 4th. So until then, nothing else will happen.
So there is a clear and unmistakable record which suggests an actual conflict of interest, and secondarily, the appearance of a conflict of interest, and that destroys the integrity of the judicial system. Keep in mind that a prosecutor is supposed to be impartial. A prosecutor represents the state sovereignty of Georgia, and this prosecutor is basically charged with finding justice. Here, I think the facts suggest that Fani Willis and her boyfriend, Mr. Wade, engaged in actions which were designed to interfere with the 2024 election. And I think the Georgia Court of Appeals basically should disqualify her. And I think the facts in the record support that.
Why we have to file in these cases is because it has implications much broader than just President Trump, even though it is a very serious matter. But when you read this, the critical need, this is from our brief on page 4, the critical need for integrity and values served by the application of conflict jurisprudence applies with special force in this case. To be sure, these principles must and do govern in the prosecution of anyone. Justice, after all, is supposed to be blind, but they apply at least as strongly, if not more so, in the prosecution of a national candidate in an election year. And then we go on to say, the bad choices, prejudices, and personal political motivations of Fulton County's district attorney and the Georgia judiciary's response thereto impact the entire nation. The integrity of Georgia's criminal justice system, implicating its prosecutors and its courts, is at stake. When we talk about a time where you see the left attacking the Supreme Court, trying to discredit it, and other courts throughout the nation, labeling a judge in Georgia as a Trump judge, these phrases, this terminology, the way they try to spin the judicial system, causes there to be a lessening of confidence within the American people that justice will be served. And to some degree, you can understand why some people may think that justice isn't served in many cases in this country. But we at the ACLJ want to preserve that. We want to strengthen the integrity of our judicial system because the rule of law is so paramount in our country. What do you think, though, about those national implications of this case in Georgia?
Well, I think the national implications are paramount. And I think if you look at the Georgia case, what we find is corruption, we find a lack of integrity, and we find an attempt, in my view, by Fani Willis to destroy the judicial system. So the ACLJ has filed in this case in order to preserve the integrity of the judicial system. And I think it's very, very important. Why? Because there is this conflict which the trial court essentially found. And I think if you go back and you look at the evidence, you look at the testimony of Fani Willis, you look at the testimony of Mr. Wade, basically Mr. Wade profited from this prosecution, And Fani Willis profited both personally and arguably financially from this prosecution.
As we point out in our brief, the conflict of interest just has to be an appearance of a conflict of interest because it is so critical that the people be able to trust that justice will be impartial. And we point this out. We reference 2 Georgia cases, so it's always important, obviously, when you're talking to a state court, to reference their own judicial precedent. And what here we reference 2 cases, Golden versus State and also Conley versus Arnold, which were 2 Georgia cases that dealt with disqualification. And I want to read this section. It's on page 7. It says, the Georgia Supreme Court further clarified, so that's clarifying from Golden versus State, in a similar factual situation, that when an appearance of impropriety exists, no representation should be permitted, regardless of whether there is evidence of wrongful intent. In other words, an appearance of wrongdoing alone is disqualifying. And when you take that with the words of Judge McAfee, in his opinion, which he released keeping Fani Willis on the case, but getting rid of Nathan Wade, the special prosecutor, it appears that he did make the incorrect judicial ruling based off of Georgia Supreme Court precedent of there being just an appearance of impropriety because he himself said there was an odor of mendacity lingering, that the remedy of just taking part of the prosecution away doesn't remedy that odor of mendacity.
And furthermore, there is Supreme Court precedent which suggests that Fani Willis should be disqualified. And so if you look at the United States Supreme Court decision in Young versus the United States Supreme Court has noted that some errors are so fundamental and pervasive, they require reversal without regard to the facts or circumstances of a particular case. An error is fundamental if it undermines confidence in the integrity of the criminal proceedings. And so if you look at the action of Mr. Wade, if you look at the actions of Fani Willis, they have in concert worked to undermine the integrity and confidence in the criminal proceedings in this case. The criminal proceedings in this case, in my opinion, are designed to profit Fani Willis and Mr. Wade, both financially and personally. And I think the American people should not have any confidence in this particular prosecution. Hence, the Georgia Court of Appeals should reverse this particular case, remove Fani Willis, and perhaps collapse the entire prosecution with respect to Mr. Trump.